Hello and welcome to Newslaundry. Today I'm joined by Urmi Bhattacheryya, who's recently authored a book called After I Was Raped. I have the book right here. And today we're here to talk about her book, in which we actually meet 5 women, including children, who've suffered sexual abuse, the youngest being almost just 8 months old, if I'm right.
Yeah.
So I just want to go back to something you said about how rape reporting is often usually done by women, right?
Yeah.
Why is that we don't have enough men reporting on rape?
Sometimes I feel like it's important to talk about allyship. Like we talk about allyship in various other fields, and it's something that should also be a part of journalism, because gender reporting now has become such a daily beat. It's no longer something that happens, something that a newsroom spares sort of airspace to once in a blue moon, once in every few months. So it's great to at least have these conversations as a team.
Have you had any moments where your pieces were being edited by a man or an editor who was not able to put themselves in the shoes of you and what you saw and what you thought was important to report? Have you ever had moments like that?
Yeah, I think so. And I remember I would understand that was happening because just of the level of caution that they'd be exercising. Like if ever a piece of mine would go to a male editor, I would see them just kind of be a little on tenterhooks. So it was usually like, this looks good, this is fine to go. I wish that would change by a male editor, if such an editor were editing my piece, in just asking me questions. It's sometimes really that simple, like just asking me, hey, you know what, I haven't had this experience, but I see that this is what you talk about so and so having faced. Can we talk about this? Can you explain to me what that was like?
You're also an upper caste woman, and you've spoken about 2 cases which were rape against the Dalit community.
Yeah.
Are you conscious of your identity when you go in to report stories, especially when it's to do with Dalit women? And what are the things that run through your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really hard to not be. Whenever I've gone to report on a case of either a Dalit woman or somebody who's perhaps doubly kind of oppressed, whether it's at a caste level, whether it's socioeconomically, it's really hard to not see that, because I've usually gone there in a car that's been hired by a newsroom, with a smartphone that's been provided by somebody, and I make my way there and I sit there and I get the story. But I know that at one point I have the agency, and basically I'll be able to exercise the means to kind of walk away from that position, and there's somebody there that won't be able to. So sometimes when I visit, one of the things that I remember I was discussing with an editor that I wanted to do was that I would usually sit at or stand at the same level that a survivor would. Like often in a lot of my experiences, survivors, call it just an internalized stigmatization or whatever it is. They'll usually sit a little apart from you, or they'll just be at a little bit of a distance, or they'll sit at a different level. They'll give you a chair or a stool. Often the only piece of furniture they have in the house usually goes to you, because you're a reporter who's come from a city or another state, and you don't belong to that milieu. So just in those little insidious ways, I think I very consciously, it's definitely very deliberate on my part that I try to do it. And I think it's important that we be deliberate, because it's easy to forget.
I want to read out a small excerpt from your book, and it starts this way. So that's where rape begins, but where does it end? Media messaging will tell you that it ends in the silhouette of a single frosted palm cutting its way down a glass pane. I'll tell you, it ends in a news bulletin about a woman aged X raped by men or a man aged Y, with aforementioned woman never to be heard of again. I'll tell you, it just does end this way. There's so much, I felt like there was so much frustration in what you were trying to say. And can you walk me through this frustration a little bit? Because it almost seems like the trigger for writing your book, right?
You may have seen it, Nidhi. There's usually, I don't think they do it so much anymore, but there's usually like this frosted glass window and there's this hand against it. Or like there's this image of a woman with just like, two hands like covering the face. And that just used to annoy the hell out of me. And I would just wonder, why is that? Like, you kind of relegate that story to that one stock image and to that one idea that this is something that is so shameful. Nidhi, you read that part out from my introduction where I also talk about how 3 years ago I actually spoke about my own case of sexual violence, where somebody who was in the news industry with me, he perpetrated violence against me. And it was only something that I spoke about years after it had happened. And I just remember also, and it was a little after I had started to write that book. So I remember that also funneling a large part of my book, where I felt like I was both writing on behalf of the women who are in the book and also on behalf of myself as the person. So I felt like me, the journalist, was writing on behalf of me, the person, if that makes any sense.
You've spoken about the story of an 8-month-old, Pia, whose name you've obviously changed, but you've spoken about her. How is it, having to talk about children who've been raped, who possibly can't even fathom what's happened to them? How do you tell that story? In what language do you access that story from them,
I made a conscious choice for the 2 kids whose stories I kept to not talk to them at all about the story, and of course change their name, their identity, any markers that I possibly could. But I had known their mothers particularly for a really long time when I first started reporting on it, and I was really blown away by how invested they were in the cases. The 8-month-old's mother, for instance, she's just this incredibly feisty woman who follows up all the time. She calls her lawyer, she calls everybody she possibly can, but she also knows that her child is now 4 months old, and eventually she'll always bring up in conversation that I hope, Didi, I hope this gets solved in another year before she starts primary 1, or at least in 2 years before she starts primary 2. So it was interesting to see that those 2 aspects are still at play, where you still want justice, but you're worried about what it's going to do to your child. And there's still that social stigma that comes into play.
And a lot of times when the families talk about justice, what results, like what is justice for them? Like, is it the hanging of the accused? And how do you make sense of their idea of justice?
In cases of the children whose mothers, I spoke to and fathers I spoke to, they definitely didn't want their kids to ever have to see that person again. But a lot of times, for instance, in the 8-month-old's case, the mother spoke about her wanting to see a hanging in the case of the perpetrator. When I was covering it during the time, of course, Nirbhaya's rapists were kind of, sentenced to hanging. And she spoke about it really vehemently. And she wanted something like that to happen for her child. And she just kind of thought of that as an example.
Mufat khoro, muft mein itna hi milega. To watch the full unedited interview, you have to subscribe to News Laundry and pay to keep news free. Because when the public pays, the public is served. We depend on you and not on advertisers. So go to www.newslaundry.com/subscription and subscribe and get all our unedited interviews, our special video shows, comics, and everything that's behind the paywall. Remember, to subscribe to News Laundry, you pay just about 10 rupees a day. That's less than, a cigarette. And smoking is injurious to health. So subscribe and watch the full interview.